I was born and raised in a small town in eastern Arkansas. My father was the sheriff for 32 years, and I followed in his path in law enforcement. Once he retired, I was promoted to sheriff. Our town is very close-knit, and it's one of those places where everyone knows everyone. Over the years, I've responded to a fair share of strange calls, but the most recent one takes the cake. Sometime around 8:30 p.m., I got a call from one of my guys that he had received a call from a family in the area who were concerned about their neighbor. Their neighbor was an elderly woman named Eleanor, and she hadn't been seen by anyone for the past 7 days. I was lucky to be very familiar with her because she was one of the nicest people in town. On holidays, she'd often bake stuff for my family and drop it off, and she was pretty much loved by everyone. So when I heard this unsettling news, I didn't hesitate to hop in the car and meet my deputy. I've done a fair amount of welfare checks, so I've learned to be ready to expect anything. Oftentimes it's just a false alarm of some sort, like someone taking a vacation, but other times, it can be much more upsetting. Given the fact that Eleanor was 76, I tried my best to prepare myself for the worst. I always make sure to send 2 guys, since anything can happen. I arrived at Eleanor's house about 10 minutes later. The deputy's car was parked on the side of the dirt road, so I pulled up right behind him. At first glance, it was apparent why we were called out. The grass was overgrown, the mailbox was full, and the house looked dark from the inside. However, her blue Chevy Trailblazer was parked in the driveway. This wasn't an immediate cause for concern, because she would only drive it once or twice a week to pick up groceries in town, or occasionally go to her pinochle club. As we started heading up the driveway, the neighbors who called came out and spoke with us. It was a husband and wife, who we each knew personally. They basically reiterated everything we noticed upon arrival, and we told them to go back inside, stating that we'd let them know once we checked it out. I started by knocking on the door a few times, shouting, "Hey Eleanor, you home?" No response. I repeated this a few times, but no one answered, so I increasingly grew more concerned. I knew Eleanor had family out east, so there was also a chance that she was visiting with them. I tried the front door, but it was locked, so I had my deputy wait in the front while I walked around the back to see if any doors were unlocked. There weren't, but once I was in the backyard, I discovered something that immediately raised a red flag. One of the windows in the back was smashed. The window was pretty high up from where I was standing, so I couldn't get a good look into the room. I tried shouting again, "Hey Eleanor, you in there?" No response again. I drew my gun and wrapped back around the house to tell my deputy, and we were left with no other option than forcing entry. Due to the glass shards along the windowsill, we opted to kick in the front door. After giving it a few good hits, it gave, and I entered first with my gun and flashlight in hand. I continued shouting for her, but there was no response. We cleared the living room, but there was no sign of her. As we made it further into the house, I noticed a very foul odor, and my heart sank. I turned into the kitchen where the smell was the strongest, and what I found brought some mild relief. There was a crock pot in the sink with uncooked chicken that had definitely been sitting out for a while. I gagged as I stepped away from it, and we continued searching the house. Up until that point, nothing seemed out of place until we reached the room with the broken window. The door was shut and locked, so we had no other choice than to kick it down as well. Well, when we tried, the door wouldn't budge. Instead, the door itself caved in the middle, but it still wouldn't open. We eventually got to the point where we were throwing our bodies into the door at the same time, and after several more attempts, the door finally opened, instantly followed by a loud crash on the other side. What I saw when I stepped inside looked like something out of a horror movie. I was looking at a completely ransacked bedroom. The bed was flipped over, clothes were all over the floor, and a huge bookshelf was flipped over, which must have been blocking the door when we tried to get in. We were looking at a crime scene. I closely observed everything in the room to try and figure out what happened, but I could only come to one horrifying conclusion. It seemed like the bookshelf was pushed in front of the bedroom door to form a barricade, but other than that, I could only guess. We finished searching the rest of the house, but there was no sign of Eleanor or anything else. I called in forensics and had them come out right away, but the entire house turned up clean. No fingerprints except for Eleanor's. Every door leading out of the house was locked, so it was apparent that someone either entered through the window, or Eleanor somehow managed to do that herself and exited through the window in a panic. Either way, something definitely happened in her house, but none of us know what. I can't imagine anyone ever having a problem with Eleanor, given that she's been one of the nicest and most caring people this town's ever had. We haven't received any tips or clues, and her family was shocked to hear the news. Although things aren't looking good, I'm still trying to remain hopeful. Maybe we'll hear from her soon, and we'll find out what happened. But in the meantime, I just hope she escaped from whatever it was. So, before this all took place, I went to get McDonald's in the nearest city to us, which is about 20 minutes away. After that, I decided to go down to my grandma's house instead of going straight home. For context, she lives down a long farm road, to which you have to turn off down a half-mile dirt driveway just to get to her house. I arrived there at around 9 p.m., and I went in and visited with my grandmother and brother who lives with her. I'd been doing this frequently ever since my grandpa passed away, so I'd be able to at least keep her company. My brother and I took out my grandma's dog to pee around 10:30 p.m., and we just sat outside listening to music and talking for a while. At that point, I was starting to get cold because after all, this was East Texas, so I wasn't used to it getting down into the low 40s at night, so I was about ready to head inside. Suddenly, I noticed something moving in the corner of my eye near the large metal shed that sits a few hundred yards from the house. I didn't really take too much notice though, because it's not uncommon for deer or raccoons to come snooping around in the yard, and plus my grandma's dog wasn't barking, so I thought that it might have just been my eyes playing tricks on me. We finally headed back inside, and my grandma went to sleep around 11 p.m., so me and my brother stayed up and played some video games for a while. At around 2:30 a.m., I was very tired and ready to go home, so I asked my brother to walk with me to the door and make sure that I made it out to my car, because I'm always very paranoid, especially at night. He joked around and said that he would turn off the light on me and lock the door, and I freaked out and begged him to walk me out to the car, to which he finally humored me. I got in my car and immediately locked the doors, and I saw the porch lights turn off as I was driving off back down the dirt road. I got home within 10 minutes and fixed myself some ice cream before I sat down and threw on some YouTube. Another 15 or so minutes passed when I got a FaceTime call from my brother, to which I picked up almost immediately. I could tell that he was freaked out about something, but he wasn't saying anything right away, so I asked him what was wrong. The following is my best attempt to paraphrase what my brother told me. He said that after I left, he went back outside to listen to some music and sit on the porch. He had the music on his phone up pretty loud, which would usually mask any noises of animals coming from the nearby woods. After a few minutes of listening to music, he said that he heard what he thought to be sounds of metal banging around, so he quickly paused the music and listened to see if he could hear the sound again. He stood up and looked towards the shop and the boat shed, which are adjacent to each other, a few hundred yards away from where he was standing. He said he saw a faint light shining around near the boat shed, but then it quickly flicked off. At this point, he was freaking out, so he quietly crept back inside the house and locked the door behind him. He said that he ran to his room in the back of the house, I guess not thinking to wake up our grandma, and grabbed his revolver. He quickly ran back outside and saw the glow of the flashlight move around, and then quickly shut off as soon as he noticed it. He walked out to the edge of the concrete carport and stared out towards the boat shed with his revolver down at his side. The only thing illuminating the boat shed was the faint light coming from the house. He said that he tried to muster up the most intimidating voice he could manage and said, "Who the hell is out there?" To which there was no immediate reply, except for a slight bumping sound which solidified the fact that someone was indeed there. Now, keep in mind, this is out in the middle of the country in a town with a population of just over 1,000 people, and the nearest house is across the lake or miles down the farm road, so no well-meaning person would just happen to stumble across my grandma's house this late at night. Also, my grandma has had problems with people snooping around the property in the past, so this wasn't something any of us take lightly. And for the life of me, I can't tell you why my brother didn't call the police, but you also have to remember that there is literally one cop in our entire town, and it was 3 a.m., so it would take at least 30 minutes for the cop to even show up. So anyway, my brother again called for the person to show themselves, repeating this question over and over. He said that he practically crapped his pants when a tall, lanky figure slowly emerged from the boat shed with a flashlight in hand. Although my brother couldn't see any distinct features about the person, he could definitely tell that it was an older man and that it was no one we knew. It was especially not anyone that should be in our boat shed at 3 a.m. He raised the revolver up to point at the man and again shouted, "Who the hell are you?" The man was still silent and began slowly walking towards him. My brother pulled back the hammer of the revolver and gave one last verbal warning to the man and said, "I swear I will shoot you. Who are you and why are you here?" The man quickly raised his hands up and said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, calm down, man," in a taunting voice as he continued walking towards my brother. My brother fired a single shot just above the man's head, to which he finally took that as his cue that my brother meant business. The man hurriedly took off on foot back down the driveway, and my brother screamed, "Next time I won't miss." My brother then quickly ran inside to wake up my grandma, who had somehow slept through the entire commotion. She didn't seem worried enough to actually call the police, but of course after hearing this, all I could think about was what were the true intentions of that man. Was he just some druggie snooping around to steal some tools for money, or were his intentions much more sinister? Another question that haunts me about the whole situation is how many times has this happened after my grandma and brother went to bed and we just didn't know, and was he watching us the whole night? I then thought about what could have happened if my brother had actually turned off the lights and locked the doors behind me when I left. When I was 19, I moved from Oregon to Florida to be with my boyfriend at the time. I was thinking white sand, beaches, and Mickey Mouse, but instead got the swamp, bugs, and dirt roads. It was a huge shock to the system. We lived in this dinky little town called Hawthorne, just outside of Gainesville. It was very small, only having one stoplight and 4 stores: Dollar General, Steve's Market, Eckerd's Pharmacy, and Sonny's Barbecue. Anyway, I got a job at the now defunct Eckerd's in the middle of town. It was next to the grocery store, so everyone shopped there. After about 3 months or so of working there, I walked in to start my shift one day when the manager pulled me into his office. Laid out on his desk were about 30 to 40 open letters, all addressed by hand to me. "Do you know this person?" my manager asked. I said no, and he told me to read one, so I did. Inside were 2 handwritten letters and a magazine cut out of a woman with long blonde hair, just like me. As the Eckerd manager watched on, I read the letter and skipped around a lot in confusion, desperately trying to find out why I was in the manager's office. From what I read, it was mostly someone imagining what spending time with me would be like. A lot of it was sexual in nature. There were descriptions and comments about my hair, washing it, smelling it, and something about the moonlight. My first thought was, am I getting fired? Then my manager spoke. "Do you know David Elrod?" I said, "Yes, I think so." He was a tall, lanky guy with thick glasses and frizzy dark blonde hair. The regular who came in a couple times a week to pick up Diet Coke and medication for his mom. He was in his late 20s, and obviously socially or mentally challenged. On rare occasions, he would make small talk as I rang up his soda. Once or twice, he would either linger at my register or stare at me, but I figured he was just trying to adjust his eyes or had poor social cues. He was harmless, compared to some of the other people I'd met in Florida, so I didn't pay him any mind, until that day in the Eckerd's office. I knew he wrote the letters because of a strange encounter 2 weeks earlier. While working, he came up behind me and caressed my hair. I had to remove it from his hands, and he apologized. It was weird, but there was no harm done, so I went back to work. After telling my manager this, he informed me that the customer was going to be banned from the store and that I was being sent home while they worked out the details. I had no idea what that meant. Confused, I walked out of the store and drove home. 2 hours after I got home from work, there was a knock on my door. I looked out the window and couldn't believe my eyes. I saw men in tactical gear with large weapons, 2 men dressed in suits, and several uniformed cops. In what seemed like slow motion at the time, I opened the door. A female officer held up a few oddly familiar letters. "Could we come in and talk to you about these?" Realizing everyone in town has read the letters, I wanted to pass out. I don't even know the guy. We took a seat on my couch, and she began to speak. The female officer mentioned getting the letters from Eckerd's and was attempting to issue a trespassing notice. The officers confronted him at his residence and attempted to invoke the trespassing notice from Eckerd's store. Apparently, he was not happy about this. He insisted for over 45 minutes how this was all a big mistake and that I wanted to talk to him. He was so combative and persistent, they decided to pursue stalking charges, and hearing that totally caught me off guard. She continued, "You need to be aware that David killed and partially dismembered his mother when he was 12 years old. He was released from a juvenile psychiatric facility less than 4 years ago. We found disturbing materials at his home. We believe he's been stalking you." My mind kept wandering, and that's when it hit me. Diet Coke was my mom's favorite drink. David was arrested the next day for stalking after he was found in the Eckert's parking lot, but the last official word was that he went back to the psychiatric hospital, at least temporarily. I didn't have the chance to read the letters in full before they were entered into some vault of evidence, nor did they explain what they found at his house, so I never had the complete picture of what was happening. My boyfriend at the time was a huge jerk about the whole thing, so I moved back to Oregon a week later.